At the bank, my father gripped my shoulder, painfully leaned in and whispered, "Just sign it. Make it easier for everyone." My mother shoved the pen into my hand, her voice cold. "Sign it, now." I trembled, but instead of signing, I secretly slid a tiny note toward the teller. "Please help me. This is not my choice." My parents smiled for the camera, pretending it was just a routine appointment. But then the bank manager walked in, locked the conference room door, and said something that changed everything. "Before I reveal the full truth behind that note, tell me where you're watching this from. And if you've ever been pressured by your family to do something against your will, hit like, subscribe, and share this story, because silence should never be the only option." My name is Emily Carter, 35 years old, living in a small house in Naperville, Illinois. After the sudden death of my husband from a stroke 2 years ago, I fell into an unending grief. My body grew weary, unexpected chest pains began to hit me, and at first I thought it was just the weight of sorrow. But then when my best friend insisted on taking me to the doctor, I was nearly stunned into silence by the test results. I had developed chronic heart disease. I was forced to change the rhythm of my life. I worked part-time remotely while taking care of my daughter Sophie, who was only 10. And like anyone who's been deeply wounded, I cherished those still around me, especially my parents, Richard and Linda. I used to believe they loved me with everything a family should offer. I was wrong. At first, everything seemed like normal concern. My mother called every morning. "Did you sleep well last night? Remember to take your meds on time today." My father said, "Your stairs are too steep." What if one day you fall? They brought over preheated meals, asked about the medication I was taking, and then gently brought up finances. One time I was too tired and had to cancel a medical appointment. My mother immediately said, "You're too weak. How can you live alone?" My father added, "If your finances were adjusted a bit, it'd ease your worries." I was touched but kept a distance. Then my father began inspecting my house like a safety expert, taking notes of outlet locations, high shelves, and pill bottles. My mother said, "We just want what's best for you." I nodded, though I was uncomfortable with how closely I was being watched. One Tuesday afternoon, they brought over a stack of papers. "This is a power of attorney," my mother said, "in case you faint or have to be hospitalized. We can handle things for you." I was startled, refused to sign, and said I wanted my lawyer to review it first. My mother lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "Don't you trust your parents?" That sentence was like a hook digging into my chest. Between illness and loneliness, I felt like an ungrateful child. After that day, my father called every day, reminding me of things I'd supposedly forgotten, most of which I remembered clearly. "Ag, you forgot your cardiologist appointment again," he said, when in reality no one had reminded me to book it. My mother emailed me links to articles heart patients risk losing financial control and face the danger of being stripped of their civil rights. I began to feel confused. Were they truly concerned, or were they slowly building a case that I was no longer competent? Then one morning I noticed my pillbox had been rearranged. My most important beta blockers were mixed with white multivitamins. I was certain I had placed them correctly, compartment by compartment. My mother stood behind me, arms crossed, sighing. "It's dangerous if you mix them up like that. We need to do something." I was speechless. I began to doubt, but then questioned myself. Was I getting confused because of the heart condition? I opened my notebook, checked every bill. All had been paid on time. The house was tidy. Sophie was happily attending school. There was nothing in my life to suggest I was incapable. But my mother's words kept echoing in my head. What if you take the wrong meds? One day, my father showed up unexpectedly. I was cleaning my room and saw him taking photos of my medicine bottles. He said it was so my mother could monitor them remotely. A chill ran down my spine. That night, I sat alone, pulling out a box of documents from under the cabinet. what remained from the company my husband once founded. Among the papers, I found the business card of David Miller, my husband's best friend and a lawyer I trusted. I called him. Just by hearing my voice, David understood the problem was far more serious than family concern. I sent him a scanned copy of the power of attorney my mother had given me and told him what had been happening. The next day, David arranged to meet at his small office on Washington Avenue. He sat quietly after reading the document. If you sign this, he said, they can withdraw money, sign off on medical decisions, and place you in any care facility as long as a doctor declares you incompetent. They can do that without even asking you first. This is a form of financial abuse targeting chronic patients, Emily. My heart pounded, not from illness, but from fear. David looked at me, his eyes serious. From now on, you need to record everything. Take notes. Check your accounts daily. And most importantly, don't let them know what you're doing. I sat silently for a long time, remembering the nights when my husband was still alive. He used to rest his hand on my chest and smile. Your heart's not as weak as you think. Back then, I didn't know if he meant biologically or emotionally. Now I understand. Family isn't always a safe place, and sometimes to protect yourself, you have to stay sharp without needing anyone's permission. I remember that morning clearly. Thursday, cold with a light drizzle. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table colouring, and I was preparing ginger tea. The phone rang, displaying my mother's name. I hesitated for a few seconds before picking up. Her voice was gentle as always. "Did you sleep well, honey?" I responded curtly, trying to maintain a normal tone, though I was on high alert inside. After a few pleasantries, she shifted the subject. "Your father and I think it's time to rearrange your bank accounts. You used to handle finances when you worked as the accountant for your husband's company. We know you're used to managing things yourself, but the situation's different now." I stopped stirring, staring out at the fogged-up window. "You don't think I can manage any more?" I asked, not hiding my coldness. My mother gave a soft laugh, then lowered her voice. "That's not it, but if something happened, who would take care of Sophie?" I looked over at my daughter, choosing a sky blue crayon for her picture, and felt my chest tighten. Before I could answer, my mother continued, "We'll stop by this Saturday with a few papers. Just look over them, that's all. No need to sign anything." It sounded harmless, but I knew better. They never came to just look. Every time the pressure would escalate. I ended the call quickly, saying only, "Bring them if you want, but I'm not promising anything." That afternoon, I sat in my home office and opened my asset management folder. Everything was neatly organized: bank reports, statements, expenses, and the inheritance from my husband. Everything was under control. But I knew that when someone wants control, they don't need reason, they just need opportunity. I added extra passwords to my 2 main files, transferred all financial data to an encrypted hard drive, and locked it in my safe. I didn't want to leave a single vulnerability. That evening, I called David and recounted the phone conversation with my mother. He paused, then said, "If they're bringing papers, it's very likely to be a co-ownership request or a document granting them power to manage your assets in emergencies. You have the right to refuse, but they won't back down easily." I sighed. "My daughter will be there that day. I'm afraid they'll use her as leverage." David was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Then you need a strategy, a way to let them reveal their intentions. Don't confront them directly. Let them believe you're starting to soften." I nodded, feeling something shift inside me. From fear to clarity, from silence to observation. I decided if this was the game they wanted to play, I'd play it to the end, but by my rules. That night, while tucking Sophie into bed, she asked, "Are you sad when Grandma calls?" I asked back, "Why do you think I'm sad?" She lowered her head and whispered, "Because you don't smile when you talk to her. You used to smile more." I pulled the blanket over her, smoothed her hair, and said, Sometimes grown-ups need time to understand what's right. But the truth was, I already understood. The right thing now was to protect Sophie from a chain of terrible choices disguised as family. Saturday morning was clear and cloudless, but inside I felt a storm brewing. I woke early, cleaned every corner of the house, not to welcome guests, but to assert control over my space, a way to stay grounded. I opened the safe, double-checked the hard drive containing my financial records, then locked it again. Sophie sat in the living room watching cartoons. I had planned to keep her away from the upcoming conversation, but my mother had already texted, "We're bringing Sophie's favorite cookies. We miss our granddaughter." At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my parents standing together holding paper bags, wearing the familiar smiles I once thought was safe. "Hi, sweetheart," my mother said as she stepped inside like everything was normal. My father placed the bags on the dining table, taking out a box of wafer cookies, a pack of tea, and a yellow envelope. I noticed the subtle tension in his jaw, a sign that today wasn't just a visit. After a few casual questions, my mother called Sophie, overslipped a small box of chocolates into her hands, and said, "Grandma brought something sweet for you. Go play in your room so Mummy can talk with us." Okay, Sophie obediently left, unaware of the storm beneath the surface. My mother looked at me and slid the envelope across the table. "We have this form. Just in case of emergencies, dear. It's only for joint ownership of the account, so we can help pay bills if needed." I didn't touch the envelope. I stared at it as if it were an unexploded mine. Cream-colored paper printed from First Community Bank. My name was already filled in, and below it blank fields for joint owners, both Richard and Linda Carter. I looked up at my father. He avoided eye contact, but his hands were clasped together, tapping rhythmically on the table. He was anxious. I spoke slowly. "Do you think I'm no longer capable of managing my own accounts?" My mother quickly replied, No, it's not like that. It's just precaution. You're still in control, but if anything happens, we can step in quickly. It's common. Everyone does this." I nodded slightly, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. I used to be an accountant. I knew exactly what joint ownership meant. They could withdraw, transfer, or close the account, all without my permission or signature. And if one day they claimed I was mentally unfit, they would hold the keys to my finances. I pressed my lips together and pushed the envelope back to the center of the table. "I need to review everything before I sign anything," I said, keeping my voice calm. My father spoke a bit sharply. "Emily, this isn't a big deal. You're being overly suspicious." I turned to my mother. "Do you remember how I cleaned up the finances of 3 clients who lost everything because of joint accounts? You used to say I was sharp with numbers and level-headed." She looked momentarily confused. I stared at her. "So now suddenly I'm not level-headed anymore." She stayed silent. The room tightened. Only the faint clink of a spoon in the kitchen where Sophie was playing broke the tension. I took a breath, stood up, picked up the envelope, but didn't open it. "I'll show this to David, my lawyer. If it's truly precautionary, then there's no rush." My father shook his head, about to say something, but my mother raised her hand to stop him. "All right, if that's what you want, we'll wait." They stood up, said their goodbyes, and left, quicker than usual. I closed the door, my back still stiff. When I returned to the room, Sophie asked, "Why didn't you eat the cookies?" I gave a faint smile. "Next time, sweetheart." But in my heart I knew there would be no next time. This wasn't about concern anymore. This was the beginning of a power grab, disguised as love, and I would not under any circumstance let them win. I never thought I'd have to prepare for an ambush inside a bank, but that's exactly what it felt like when my mother texted me, "The notary will be at the First Community Bank branch at 10 a.m. Wednesday. We've made an appointment. Don't worry, it's just a few papers. No request, just a notification. I read the message 3 times, then slowly folded my phone shut. They were escalating. They thought I would remain silent. That morning I didn't dress casually. I chose a crisp white blouse, dark slacks, and low heels. I wanted to look sharp, professional, and in control. Before leaving the house, I knocked on Mr. Lincoln's door. The elderly neighbor who once helped fix my backyard fence after a storm. I trusted him. He opened the door, still wearing his flannel shirt and old thick leather belt. When I explained the situation, he didn't ask many questions, just said, "You shouldn't go alone. I'll stand behind you, not interfere, unless they mess with your dignity." We arrived at the bank on time. The lobby was bright smelling of synthetic lavender with the soft clatter of a printer from the next counter. My parents were already seated at a long table near the window where a folder and a nameplate reading Notary Public. Carol L. Jensen were waiting. My mother smiled as I walked in. My father didn't. He simply nodded. I introduced Mr. Lincoln as a neighbor here for reassurance. My mother raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I sat down and pulled out a notebook. Every gesture, every glance, every word, I would remember. "We just need to verify a few signatures," my mother said, sliding the folder toward me. Inside was a form similar to the last, joint account authorization, but this time with an added clause designating someone to act on my behalf for financial and medical matters. Upon cognitive instability confirmed by a family member. I swallowed hard. One sentence, and they could take over everything. The notary began flipping through pages, preparing to check IDs. I kept a neutral face, but my palms were slick with sweat. When my mother leaned across the table to show me where to sign, I whispered I'd like to ask a bank staff member about this clause. My mother frowned. "Why, it's simple?" I looked up and saw a bank associate walking past with a stack of papers. Almost instinctively, I pulled a small folded note from my pocket and slipped it to her as she approached the table. She read it quickly and her eyes changed. She invited me to follow her to verify account details. A plausible excuse to leave the table without suspicion. She led me to a small room in the back. Just a desk and 2 chairs. She closed the door and lowered her voice. "I'm Sarah Thompson, the branch manager. I just read your note, okay? I'm being pressured to sign a transfer of assets. Please help." I nodded. Sarah opened a drawer, pulled out an internal report form. "Would you like me to file this as a suspected case of financial abuse?" I answered immediately. "Yes. And I want to document any further pressure they apply." Sarah whispered, "This room has an internal camera. Stay calm, go back, and if there's any coercion, we'll have it on record." I thanked her and returned to the table with a new sense of strength. For the first time in weeks, I had an ally. As I sat down, my father leaned over, placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, firm and pressing, and whispered, "Don't make a small thing complicated. Just sign so everyone can relax." His grip was strong, not a father's touch, but a psychological tactic. I glanced at Sarah across the room. Her eyes never left us. I knew the camera was running. I leaned slightly forward, pretending to be shaken, then said softly, "I need more time, and a lawyer." My mother shot up her face, turning from sweet to furious. "Is someone putting ideas in your head who made you doubt your own parents?" I didn't answer. Mr. Lincoln stood quietly behind me like a pillar, steady and wordless. My father withdrew his hand, his face flushed red with anger. But I still didn't sign, and I knew from that moment on, the dynamic had shifted. They were no longer the ones supporting me. They were now the ones being watched. After leaving the bank that morning, I didn't go straight home. I sat in a small cafe across from the branch, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of ginger tea, my heart still trembling slightly. Not from fear, but because for the first time in months I felt like I had regained some control. Sarah Thompson wasn't just a bank manager. She was one of the few who saw the full picture and didn't turn away. In the exact moment my father gripped my shoulder at the table, and my mother insisted I was being influenced by someone, Sarah had taken note of everything. As we were leaving the bank, she handed me a small slip of paper. Inside was an internal phone extension, a direct email, and one line, handwritten in blue ink: "You are not weak, and you are not alone." I held that note as if it were a quiet declaration of independence. That afternoon, I called her back. We met again in a private room, this time without my parents, without the notary. Just two women talking about financial freedom and truth. Sarah showed me a clip pulled from the bank's security footage. My father leaning in hand, gripping my shoulder, the force creasing my blouse. My expression was tense while he said something. There was no sound, but the image clearly captured the imbalance of power. Sarah asked, "What do you want to do next?" I didn't hesitate. I want my account monitored and flagged for suspicious access. And I want to start documenting everything, every coercive act, every veiled comment, every message. Sarah nodded. "We can open a secondary account with private access. Only you can withdraw from it. The current account will be flagged for monitoring, and if any suspicious withdrawal is attempted, we'll call for verification immediately." I agreed. We signed the confirmation forms, and she gave me 2 copies to send to my lawyer, David. That night, under the soft yellow light of my bedroom, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. The file, Truth and Evidence. I uploaded screenshots of my mother's emails, my father's reminder texts about forgotten doctor's appointments that no one had actually scheduled, and notes I'd written after every visit. I remembered the tiniest details, the way my mother mixed my heart medication with vitamins, the way my father inspected my pill bottles and secretly took photos. Each small act, taken alone, might seem harmless, but pieced together they painted a clear map of manipulation. I also documented the words that had hurt me, but I'd once ignored. "You're the last burden your father and I can't let go of," my mother had said casually over dinner 3 months ago. I pretended not to hear it then, but now I wrote it down, in black and white, no more excuses. And in one very quiet moment, as I saved the last file of the day, I saw myself in the mirror, no longer just a heart patient trapped between familial love and growing doubt. I was a mother, a widow, a person fighting not to be erased by her own blood. I knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time I felt the wind shift. Not through loud confrontations, but through quiet, deliberate, irrefutable action. And when you have evidence, allies, and clarity, you are no longer weak. I was coming back, on my own territory. 1 week after our first meeting, I returned to the bank to withdraw a small amount for daily expenses. As I stepped through the glass doors, Sarah was already waiting, her calm smile, a contrast to the tension of the day I first asked for help. She led me into a private office, locked the door, and opened her laptop to show me a newly extracted security video. In it, my father was seen speaking sharply to the notary after I refused to sign, his eyes cold, while my mother leaned in and whispered something into my ear. Sarah zoomed in on her lips and read aloud, "You'll make Sophie pay if you keep this up." I shuddered. That threat, wrapped in the silence of a quiet room, was now evidence. Sarah said firmly, "This isn't just a family matter anymore. This is coercion. I've stored everything in the bank security system, time-stamped and legally certified. You need to give this copy to your lawyer immediately." I nodded, tension winding through me like a tight string, but also feeling a small measure of relief. And she didn't stop there. Sarah showed me how to set up automatic alerts. Anytime a transaction of $5,000 or more occurred, I would receive an emergency text and email. "If anyone tries to move money without your permission, there will be a trail," she said, eyes steady. Then she leaned closer, her voice low. "Emily, you don't need to keep pretending everything's normal around them. Let the evidence speak for you. Your job is to document, preserve, and stay patient. The rest, David and I will handle. That afternoon, I brought the USB drive with the footage to David's office. He watched the clip, then leaned back in his chair, arms folded. This is it, the coercion, the threats, all caught on camera. We can use this to file a court motion to restrict their access immediately. He picked up a pen and outlined the plan. Step 1. Transfer a large portion of my assets into a trust where only he and I would be the legal managers. Step 2. Obtain a medical competency letter from my cardiologist, confirming that despite my condition, I was mentally sound. Step 3. Prepare a counterfile in case my parents attempted to declare me legally incompetent. David looked me in the eye, serious and steady. Emily, I know this isn't the battle you wanted, but you must be ready. People can forgive weakness, but the law only sees documentation. And right now, the documents are still on their side, unless we shift the balance. I clenched both hands, feeling the cold ring on my finger, the only thing left of my husband. I whispered as if to him, I won't let them take what we built. Not to them, not ever. As I stepped out of David's office, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Naperville. For the first time in months, I didn't feel lost. I had allies, I had a plan, and most importantly, I had undeniable proof. The battle had begun, but I was no longer alone. I had laid the first stones on the path to protect myself and protect Sophie. Monday morning, just as I was getting Sophie ready for school, my phone buzzed. A message from the bank lit up the screen. Alert withdrawal of $20,000 from account. Vår 321, flagged as suspicious. Please contact immediately. I froze coffee cup, trembling in my hand, spilling half its contents. Sophie looked up. Mum, what's wrong? I forced a weak smile, waved it off. It's nothing, sweetheart. Go grab your coat. But inside, fear surged, alongside a rising fury. I called Sarah immediately. After only a few rings, her voice came through, urgent but steady. Emily, I saw the transaction. It was made by Richard Carter, your father, withdrawing directly at the South Branch. They claimed it was for a Florida vacation deposit. I've frozen the transaction for 24 hours pending verification, but you need to act fast. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I drove Sophie to school, blood boiling. After kissing her goodbye and watching her disappear into the classroom, I drove straight to David's office. David listened to me recount everything, then growled, "They've crossed the line. This is no longer a scheme. This is a criminal act. We'll immediately file an emergency motion for court restriction and begin the full asset transfer into the trust." He opened his laptop and typed rapidly. I watched his steady hands, remembering the days when he and my husband would sit in our living room talking about investments, about future dreams. Now that same friend was helping me protect what remained from my own flesh and blood. Sarah called again, this time, her voice low and urgent. Emily, I dug deeper. It's worse. Not only the $20,000 I found a test transfer of $500 last night to a newly opened account under the name Linda Carter. I could barely believe it. They were testing the system before going for a bigger withdrawal, Sarah explained. If I hadn't flagged it in time, your principal funds might already be gone. I closed my eyes, gripping my hands so tightly my nails pressed into my skin. David looked up, his eyes sharp. We freeze everything. I'll file today and request emergency protection. Emily, be prepared. They will retaliate. I exhaled, body tense, but somewhere deep inside, I felt myself standing taller. No longer a passive victim. I had evidence. I had a lawyer. I had a bank behind me. That afternoon, I sat in Sarah's office, signing the paperwork to lock down the shared accounts. Sarah looked at me, voice firm. Remember, every move they make from now on will leave a trace. You don't have to win with words, Emily. You'll win with documents, with proof, and with the truth. I nodded. and for the first time in months my heart raced, not from illness but from resolve. My parents thought they had gained control of my finances, but the moment they touched that $20,000, they wrote their names into the record of betrayal, and I won't let this opportunity slip away. My phone began ringing non-stop early the next morning. First it was my mother. "Emily, you're making everything more complicated. That money was only meant to keep you and Sophie safe. Don't let outsiders meddle in our family." I didn't answer. I let the voicemail run nearly 3 minutes. Then my father called. His voice was deep, heavy. "If you keep fighting this, you'll make everyone suffer, especially your daughter." I listened, heart tightening, but my hands trembled, not from fear but from rage. By noon the doorbell rang. I peeked through the curtain and saw Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, holding a bag of warm food. She smiled and called out loudly, "I brought chicken soup, so Sophie can have a warm dinner." I hesitated but opened the door. Instead of simply handing over the food, she stepped inside, placed the bag on the kitchen table and sat down. Her voice lowered. "Emily, your mother just wants what's best for you. A long-term care facility would give you peace of mind." "Did you know your mother cried all night?" I gripped the back of the chair, feeling like I was sitting in an invisible courtroom where I was the defendant, and my relatives took turns as witnesses. That evening, just as I tried to wrest the pastor from our local church, someone I had only spoken to briefly on Sundays, called. His voice was soft but pointed. "Emily, your parents are deeply worried. They only want you to be well cared for. Sometimes pride keeps us from accepting necessary help. You should reconsider." I bit my lip in silence. When the call ended, tears rolled onto my pillow. Not because I believed them, but because I realized I was being isolated. Those who once gave me spiritual comfort were now tools of pressure. That night I sat in the living room with only the desk lamp on. My laptop screen glowed with the folder, the file, truth and evidence. I opened my notes and typed day 14. Mum called 7 times. Dad called 5 times. Aunt Carol visited, brought food, urged nursing home. Pastor called, said I was prideful. I typed each word with trembling but determined fingers. Every action would become evidence. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees and slipped under the door. I remembered what my husband once told me. You don't always get to choose how your family loves you, but you can always choose how to protect yourself. Now I truly understood. They were trying to break me with pressure, with family ties, with isolation. But instead of collapsing, I felt a fire begin to burn inside me. When my phone rang for the 17th time that day, I didn't answer. I just stared at it, letting the ringing echo through the dark room like a reminder they are closing in. But I am still standing, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled, a small smile but unshakable. The next morning, as I was brewing coffee, my phone lit up with Sarah's name. Her voice came through tense, no longer the calm she usually carried Emily. I just detected another suspicious transaction. Last night, a $5,000 transfer was attempted to a newly linked account under Richard Carter's name. It was automatically blocked by our alert system, but it's clear they're trying backdoor access to your remaining assets. I gripped my mug so tightly it hurt. They're not going to stop, are they?" I asked. Sarah sighed. "No, which is why we have to stay a step ahead." Just as I ended the call, a knock came at the door. I hesitated, then opened it slightly. Mr. Lincoln stood there in a thick coat, his face serious. He spoke directly, no hesitation. "I saw them last night outside your yard, just after dark. They thought I wouldn't notice, but I saw the headlights. Emily, I can't stay silent anymore. If you need me, I'll testify. I'll speak to what I've seen. The surprise visits, the papers they bring, even the arguments on your porch. I'm not afraid of anyone." His voice was steady, like a vow. Tears welled in my eyes. while my own blood turned against me, a near stranger was the only one brave enough to stand by my side. I whispered, "You don't owe me anything. Why are you doing this?" Mr. Lincoln gave a small smile. "Because I used to be a soldier, I know what it feels like to be betrayed by those meant to protect you. And I won't let it happen to you." That afternoon, I met with Sarah and David in the small bank office. Sarah placed detailed statements in front of us showing the block transactions, unmistakable evidence of systematic attempts to seize my funds. David tapped his pen against the desk, his voice sharp. "We now have it all video of coercion, proof of unauthorized transfers, and a witness ready to testify. Emily, you're not just defending yourself anymore, you're armed to fight back." I sat there, hands folded in my lap, feeling my heart pound, but not from weakness. This time it was strength. I looked at David, then at Sarah, then thought of Mr. Lincoln, who had promised to stand for me. I was no longer a woman under siege. I had allies, and I was ready for the next phase of this war. That evening it was drizzling. The house was quiet, with only Sophie reading in her room. I had just reached for the teapot when headlights cast shadows across the window. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. My heart sank as I saw my father step out, flanked by two unfamiliar men in dark coats, tall and imposing. The doorbell rang violently over and over. I froze in the living room, hands trembling, but managed to lock the deadbolt. He knocked hard, his voice deep and commanding. Emily opened the door. "These are private medical aids. You need help. You're not in control anymore." I peeked through the curtain. The two men behind him held black medical bags and a blood pressure monitor. They looked like doctors or like enforcers. I clutched my phone, heart racing, not from illness but from fury. I shouted through the door, "I did not request anyone here. This is my home. If you don't leave in 1 minute, I'm calling the police." There was a pause. Then my father growled, "Don't let outsiders control you. You're destroying yourself. If you won't cooperate, Sophie will suffer the consequences." I shuddered. They were now using my daughter as leverage. Without hesitation, I called David. His voice was calm but stern. "Don't open the door. Don't engage. I'll request an emergency court order and alert the police. For now, you and Sophie need to leave. I have a safe guest house. Go there now." I grabbed a few clothes, packed my laptop, and the hard drive containing the file. Truth and evidence. Sophie ran out, eyes wide. "Mum, who's outside?" I knelt and took her hands. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just going to stay at a friend's for a while." She nodded, trusting me completely. While my father and the two strangers remained on the porch, I quietly slipped out the back door, holding Sophie close. Mr. Lincoln, having noticed the headlights from his porch, was already waiting, raincoat on, ready to walk us to the car. He said softly, "Go. I'll stay and watch. If they try to enter, I'll call the police." As I drove away from the neighborhood, my hands trembled, but inside a new certainty took root. My parents had revealed their true intent. This was no longer veiled concern. It was a campaign to strip me of my autonomy. But now that they had shown their hand, with witnesses, with evidence, with legal intervention, the knife they wielded would turn against them, and I knew the final battle was near. 3 days after my father brought two strangers to my door, I walked into the central Naperville bank branch, with David and Sarah by my side. The air inside was cold, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. David carried a thick file with a freshly issued court order, a freeze on old joint accounts, bearing the names of Richard and Linda Carter. Sarah walked beside us, determined, carrying the hard drive, with all the video evidence. I took a deep breath and stood tall. This wasn't a family meeting, this was a public reckoning. My parents were already seated in the bank's conference room with my cousin Kelly, who had always sided with them. As I entered, my mother immediately spoke. "Emily, why are you airing family matters to strangers? You're letting lawyers and bankers control you. My father slammed his hand on the table. "We just wanted to protect you and Sophie. You're disgracing the whole family." I said nothing. David placed the file on the table, sliding the court order to the notary. Under order number 347 Illinois, this account is hereby frozen due to evidence of financial abuse and coercion. Any transaction by Richard or Linda Carter is now legally void. My father's face turned red. He jumped up. "This is a lie. Emily isn't of sound mind. Her heart condition clouds her judgment." My mother nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "You've been manipulated, darling. Please just listen to your mother." Right then, Sarah turned on the monitor in the corner. The video showed my father gripping my shoulder, growling, "Just sign so everyone can rest." The look in his eyes was angry, his hand visibly digging into my blouse. The room fell silent. Kelly covered her mouth in shock. Sarah spoke clearly. "This is a time-stamped extract from our security system legally certified by the bank. We also have records of unauthorized $20,000 and $5,000 transfers, both executed by Richard and Linda Carter." She placed the printed statements on the table. The sound of paper hitting wood was sharp, like a judge's gavel. Kelly looked at me, then at my parents, torn. Finally she sighed and whispered, "I'll testify for Emily." I saw how Uncle Richard and Aunt Linda pressured her. "This isn't love, it's control." Those words sliced through the illusion my parents had built. David concluded, voice firm, "From now on, all of Emily's assets will be held in a legal trust under her control. Her parents are barred from direct access unless a new court order is granted. This isn't betrayal. This is justice." I sat still, tears falling silently, but feeling lighter than I had in months. My father stared at me, furious and powerless. My mother collapsed into her chair, speechless, and I, for the first time in a long time, felt free. As we left the room, Sarah gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "Emily, you did what so many in your situation are too afraid to do. You reclaimed your voice." I nodded, lifting my face to the grey Illinois sky. Inside me, a new chapter had begun. I was no longer the manipulated woman. I had become my own protector. After the confrontation at the bank, my house became eerily quiet. No more surprise doorbells, no more late-night phone calls, no unfamiliar cars parked outside. Just me and Sophie and the small, ordinary rhythms we had longed for. Every morning I walked Sophie to school, then returned home, brewed a cup of tea, and opened my laptop in the quiet of my study. The simple act of sitting at my desk, making decisions without fear of interference. It was a new kind of freedom. David had completed the transfer of all assets into a trust. My name with its firm signature was now on pristine legal documents. No more space for forgery or abuse. He also introduced me to an online support group for people who had suffered financial manipulation by family. I joined out of curiosity and was surprised to find dozens of women in the same town who had lived through similar stories. Some had brothers who stole insurance money. Others had children who pressured them into signing over their homes. I was no longer alone. I belonged to a community of survivors, and we were rising. Sarah had become a real friend. Sometimes after work, she would stop by with a box of pastries from the bakery near the bank. We sat on the porch, eating and chatting. She rarely talked about work. Instead, she asked about Sophie, about my little flower garden, about the books I liked. Perhaps she understood that what I needed now wasn't just legal allies, but a friend who wouldn't judge, wouldn't pressure. Mr. Lincoln continued to quietly watch over us. Whenever a fence post broke in the backyard or the back door lock stuck, he came over with his old toolkit. "This one's easy," he'd say, and while he worked, Sophie ran around asking questions and I made coffee. One time he stayed longer, looked at me slowly and said, "You know, Emily, there are battles no one chooses, but if you have to walk through one walk with your head held high, you've done that." I smiled, too choked to reply, because sometimes the simplest words reach the deepest places in your heart. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, I stepped onto the porch. The autumn wind was crisp leaves rustling in the yard. I looked up at the star-filled sky and realized I no longer feared silence. Silence now wasn't control, it was a gift, a space to breathe, to live, to begin again. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfectly smooth, but in that moment in our little Naperville home, I felt it clearly. For the first time in years, I was truly free. Peace didn't last long before the old chains found their way back. One morning, just as I poured my coffee, my phone showed a new voicemail. My mother's trembling voice played Emily. I know I was wrong. The money, it was my fault. But I can't lose you. Please just give me a chance to talk. I froze, conflicted. I remembered her at the bank denying everything until the video played. This apology now felt more like a plea than a real admission. A few days later, a handwritten letter appeared in my mailbox. My father's firm handwriting read, Emily, we are a family. No matter what happened, you're still our daughter. End this war. Sophie needs her grandparents, and we need you. I read it again and again, then folded it slowly. They didn't mention the $20,000. They didn't mention the late-night doorbells or the 2 strangers they brought to my doorstep. Only desperate words trying to return to their former roles. I thought about it for many nights. Finally, I left a brief message. If you want to see Sophie, it must be in the park. During the day. You may speak only with her, no pressure on me. I didn't know if that was wisdom or weakness, but deep down I wanted Sophie to see that her mother had tried to leave the door slightly open. On the day of the meeting, Naperville was glowing in late autumn light. I brought Sophie and told her to stay near the playground. A few minutes later, my parents arrived. My mother wore a grey wool coat, eyes red. My father clutched a paper bag. She stepped closer, voice shaking. I'm sorry, Emily, that $20,000. I shouldn't have done it. I thought it was just a mistake. I didn't mean to take from you. I looked her in the eye and replied clearly, you call it a mistake? But you signed documents, you withdrew the money, you made a down payment on a care facility. That wasn't a mistake. That was a plan. My father cut in voice harsh. You still think you're the victim. You've made us the villains in front of everyone. Don't you see you're destroying yourself? I took a deep breath, staying calm. No, Dad. I stopped you from destroying me and my daughter. I saw Sophie in the distance pausing, confused by our tone. I gestured for her to keep playing, then turned back. No more fake tears, no more circular excuses. In that moment, I realized this meeting wasn't for reconciliation. It was for me to assert my boundary one last time. I spoke slowly, deliberately. I've chosen my own path. If you want to be a part of this family, the only condition is to respect my boundaries. If not, this door will close forever. My mother slumped, tears falling. My father turned away, silent. I took Sophie's hand and walked out of the park without looking back. My heart ached, but I also felt relief, because finally I had said out loud what I'd only dared to think for years. And even as I heard my mother's choked voice behind me, I knew I had taken a step I could never undo. That afternoon, after we left the park, Sophie and I walked the stone path back to the car. She was quiet, holding my hand tighter than usual. I knew her mind was full of questions. As we sat in the car, Sophie finally whispered, Mom, why was Grandma crying? Why was Grandpa so mad? I took a deep breath and looked at her through the rearview mirror. Her clear eyes were waiting for truth. I turned to her and held her small hand. My love, I love you more than anything in the world. But there's something you need to understand. Sometimes even people called family can hurt us. Grandma and Grandpa didn't respect me. They tried to take what belonged to me, and because of that, I can't trust them the same way anymore. Sophie frowned, but They're still my grandparents, right? I nodded, voice catching, yes, they are. But to stay in our lives, they have to learn to respect Mommy. If they can't do that, then it doesn't matter who they are. I won't let them near you, because my job is to protect you and to protect myself. Just then my phone buzzed again. I recognized the ringtone. It was her. I let it ring. I let it die. Then came the text, Emily, don't leave us. You don't understand everything. Please give us another chance. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then placed the phone face down. I said firmly, you see, Sophie, they're still trying, but today I made it clear. This isn't about forgiveness anymore. It's about choosing my freedom. Sophie nodded slowly as if understanding something far beyond her age. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered, I only need you, Mom. I believe you. Tears fell, not from fear, but from strength. Because in that moment I had passed something on to my daughter, the power to say no. As we drove home, the orange-red sunset stretched across the Illinois sky. I knew there would be more pleading, more attempts to pull me back, but my heart had chosen. I wouldn't return. I wouldn't open that old door again. And for the first time, freedom wasn't just a concept. It was the breath in my lungs, the hand in mine and the road ahead, unchained by manipulation. 6 months after that day in the park, I found a small envelope in the mailbox. My mother's familiar, shaky handwriting gave me pause before I opened it. Inside was a long letter, the paper wrinkled and damp in places with tears. Emily, I've started therapy. The doctor says I have to face the truth, that I manipulated you out of fear of abandonment. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I just want you to know I was wrong and I'm trying to change. I read every word, my heart torn, aching for what was lost, but also relieved that at least the truth had finally been spoken. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stepped onto the porch where the daisies Sophie and I had planted were blooming. The evening breeze carried a sweet scent, so unlike the heavy air of past months. I realized forgiveness was no longer the point. What mattered was that I had chosen my path. That night I opened my laptop and created a blog post. I titled it, Illness Does Not Mean Losing Your Autonomy. In it, I told my story. The forced signatures, the relentless calls, the moment at the bank when truth was finally revealed. I wrote it all, plainly, honestly, no embellishments, no hiding. And at the end I left a message. If someone is using your illness, your weakness, or your fear to take from you, remember you are not alone, you are not crazy, and you have the right to say no. Or by morning the post had been shared across local women's forums. Dozens of messages came in from people who had lost money to siblings, elders forced to sign over homes, single mothers whose families controlled their every decision. I read each one, tears falling, but this time they were tears of connection, of strength. I was no longer just fighting for myself. I'd added my voice to a silence that had gone on too long. When Sophie ran onto the porch and hugged me, she smiled. Are you writing your story again, Mum? I nodded, replying, Yes, love. I'm telling it so others don't have to go through it alone. She leaned on my shoulder and we watched the sky turn gold. I knew this journey wasn't over, but now it was no longer just a story of pain. It had become a story of healing and of a woman who dared to speak out to reclaim herself. This is my story, a woman once exploited by her own family through illness who chose to rise to protect herself and her daughter. If you've ever felt dismissed, manipulated, or controlled because of weakness or disease, remember this, you are not alone. You have the right to say no. Thank you for listening to the end. Tell me where you're watching this from. And if you've been through something similar, share your story in the comments. Someone out there might find strength in your words. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future stories. And above all, remember your voice matters. You deserve respect.